Hello everybody, welcome to this very exciting video about punctuating dialogue. Please make sure that you have the correct answers in your notes, which might require you to stop and start this and kind of flip back and forth between your Notability notes and this video. So let's get started. So hopefully you already read through the actual PowerPoint notes. The reason for having you do this is because I do want you to put at least 10 examples or 10 quotes or 10 times that someone speaks into your narrative. And it can be a lot more than that, but I do want at least 10. I think something important to realize is that the 10 shouldn't all be grouped in one little part of your story and then never happen again. It would be weird if people had a conversation in the beginning of your narrative and then never talked again for the whole thing. They should be evenly dispersed throughout your whole narrative, which is why it'll probably end up being a lot more than 10. So when you're writing your narrative, when do you start a new paragraph? That's going to be something to think about. And starting a new paragraph simply means hitting return once and then indenting and tabbing to start the new paragraph. So here's when you do that. You change, you go to a new paragraph when there is a change in speaker. So for example, if your character Bob is speaking and then all of a sudden Grace says something, then in that sentence, when Grace is going to begin speaking, that whole sentence needs to move to a new line and be indented because it's a new speaker. You also start a new paragraph when there's a change in time. So let's say that Nate is your character and you're talking about something he does in the morning, and then you're going to skip a bunch of hours and talk about what he did later that evening. You would go to a new paragraph to show that there's been a time change. You change into a new paragraph when there's a change in place. So if your character Josh is at the playground and then you want to talk about how later he is in his room doing his homework, then you're in a new place, so you would go to a new paragraph. And then finally, a new paragraph when there is a change in a major event or action. So let's say that you're talking about at Kennywood how somebody was lost, and then all of a sudden you're going to talk about how they were found. That's a total change in event. You would go to a new paragraph. Okay, let's talk about when you would put quotation marks. When somebody speaks, you put quotation marks before and after the exact words that come out of the person's mouth. For example, Monet Davis said, "I pitched a shutout last night in the Little League World Series." The actual words that Monet Davis said were, "I pitched a shutout in the Little League World Series." Those were the words, so I'm going to put quotes before the I and after World Series. What letters get capitalized? The letters that get capitalized are the first letter of the first word in the quotation marks. So for example, Amy said, "Let's go to the Steeler game." Let's is the first word in the quotation, so the first letter L should be capitalized. It should be a capital L. Almost always punctuate inside the quotation marks. So for example, Amy said, "Come on." The exclamation point, because "come on" might be said with quite a bit of emphasis, you would probably want to use an exclamation point, but it's inside the quotation marks almost always. Something that I want you to realize is that when you identify the person speaking, we call this a speaker tag. A speaker tag is a little tag you put on next to the quote that shows who's talking. So the John said, the John asked, the Amy said, all of these are speaker tags. And you have 3 different options as to where you want to put these speaker tags. One option is to put the speaker tag at the beginning of the sentence. Another option is to put that speaker tag in the middle, and then the third is to put that speaker tag at the end. So if you are going to put the speaker tag at the beginning, and therefore if your quote is going to end the sentence, then you will use a period, a question mark, or an exclamation point inside the quotation marks if the quote ends the sentence, meaning if the quote is at the end of the sentence and if the speaker tag's at the beginning. So again, your choices would be John said, comma, quote, my dog is very nice. I could put a period at the end of that, or this could have been an exclamation point. In the next one, John asked, do you want to pet the dog, or a question mark. Those are your 3 choices. When the speaker tag comes first and the quote comes second, you could put a period, a question mark, or an exclamation point. Now, if you want to identify the speaker tag at the beginning, just like we did up here, the other thing you have to think about is you have to put a comma after the speaker tag. So if you identify the speaker before the quotation, put a comma after the speaker tag. Amy said, comma, it's almost time to go. And again, this could be a period right here. This could be an exclamation point here, or if it had been a question, it could have been a question mark here inside the quotes. Your second option with speaker tags is to have the speaker tag come at the end and the quote at the beginning of the sentence. So if that's the case, then your choices are you can use a comma, not a period. That was a period up here, but now when the speaker tag comes at the end, your choices at the end of the quote are a comma, a question mark, just like above, and an exclamation point, just like above. So to fill this in, use a comma, question mark, or exclamation point inside the quotation marks if the quotation does not end the sentence. It begins the sentence instead. So for example, the Pirates are my favorite team, John said. My choices now here are still exclamation point inside the quotes, but no longer can I put a period there. My other choice would be a comma there, or if it had been a question mark there. Are you ready, John asked? Again, comma here if it were a question, exclamation point here if it was a question or a something said with emphasis, but because it's a question, we're going to put a question mark here. So the only difference between these 2 are that if the speaker tag comes first, then you can put a period at the end of the sentence, but if the speaker tag comes second, you can put a comma at the end. Finally, you can identify the speaker tag. Oh, I'm sorry, before that. If you identify the speaker tag after the quotation, like we did up here, then you need to put a period at the end of the entire sentence, like after the John said. For example, it's almost time to go home, comma, quote, can't put period here because the sentence isn't over. Amy said, period. If you interrupt the quotation, this is your third option. You can put the speaker tag right smack in the middle of the quotation. This is probably the hardest one to do. But if you decide to put the speaker tag in the middle of the quotation, you can use a comma inside the first part of the quote, and then you would use a period, exclamation point, or question mark at the very end. Do not capitalize the second part of the interrupted quotation if the quotation is continuing. So let me show you what I mean. Jamie said, I think, comma, because it's not over yet. You have to put a comma inside the first part of the quote. Jamie said, comma, because it's still not over, and then lowercase w, because this is just a continuation of the first part of the sentence, I think. We're going to be late for school, and then period to end it. Or that could technically be an exclamation point or a question mark there too. So I think the most important thing to do when you go to do your narratives is to, in the editing process, to go back and make sure that you're checking these rules and then going back and checking your quotes in your story to make sure that you followed them perfectly, because it gets very confusing who's saying what if you don't punctuate quotations correctly.